Planet Reddit, today's story is...
My mother-in-law poisoned my dying father-in-law against me after 5 years of caring for him, but on the day the will was read, something happened that no one expected. I am experiencing a storm of emotions, anger, pain, and betrayal, all at the same time. My father-in-law, Henry, recently passed away, and instead of processing my loss, all that is on my mind is how unfair our last goodbye was. Henry and I had a special relationship, closer than the one I had with any other member of my husband's family. He was a kind, brilliant man, and he always treated me with consideration, something that contrasted notably with the treatment I received from my mother-in-law, Patricia, about whom I will share more details later. From the moment Henry's illness began to deteriorate, I was one of the few people who truly got involved in his care. I took care of transporting him to his medical appointments, I organized all his documentation, and I kept him company when he needed to talk to someone because his weakness prevented him from doing anything else. And what did I get in return? A stab in the back. A few months ago, Patricia started accusing me of stealing money from Henry's bank account. She spread this rumor to everyone, including Henry himself. Initially, I thought it was just another one of her manipulative tactics, but then I noticed changes in Henry's behavior. He stopped trusting me and no longer allowed me to help him like before. I didn't understand what had happened until I finally confronted my husband about it. He confessed that his mother had shown him supposed evidence of my theft. I almost lost my composure. I have never in my life taken anything that didn't belong to me. I have my own job, my own income, and I have never needed resources from Henry. But Patricia, being the manipulator she is, must have fabricated some evidence convincing enough for a man in his vulnerable state to believe her. And unfortunately, her strategy worked. Shortly before he passed away, Henry called my husband and me to his room to inform us that he had changed his will. He didn't go into much detail, but he made it clear that, after seeing the alleged evidence presented by Patricia, he felt he could no longer place his trust in me as he had done before. I tried to defend my innocence, but he was already so weak and exhausted that he simply shook his head and said that I should do what was best for his family. That moment broke me completely. I spent years proving my worth in this family, making sure that Henry was well looked after, that he took his medication on time, that his life was made easier while Patricia was hardly involved at all. I was the one who did the shopping when he was too weak to go out. I was the one who argued with the doctors to make sure he received proper care. I was the one who spent whole nights with him. And in the end, it all came crashing down because of one of Patricia's lies. I tried to talk to Henry before he left, but he refused to see me alone. Patricia was always there. She knew she had won. She had manipulated a sick and vulnerable man into doubting me enough to change the whole situation. And now he's gone, and I'll never have a chance to make it up to him. My husband Mark was completely devastated when Henry told us about the change in the will, but he still refused to confront him. He kept saying that Henry was too ill, too tired, and that we should let him go in peace. He insisted that the important thing was that we knew the truth. But that wasn't enough. Not when Patricia and Ryan, my brother-in-law, got exactly what they wanted. And now I have to attend the wake and the funeral, pretending normality while Patricia watches me with her arrogant smile. She has already started with her indirect and aggressive comments, saying things like, "Well, I hope you still find it in your heart to pay your respects, dear, after all." As if she were the noble person. As if she hadn't spent the last few months manipulating Henry to benefit her incompetent son financially. Ryan, by the way, is brimming with joy. He's walking around acting like the grieving son, when in reality, all he cares about is the money. He's already started talking about his plans once the will is officially read. A new car, a trip to Bali, maybe investing in a portfolio of businesses. Which, knowing Ryan, means wasting all the money in a few months and then turning to Patricia again for more because he invested, in inverted commas, in the next big opportunity. Or more precisely, in another cryptocurrency with no real value. I feel nauseous just thinking about it. I'm not even sure I can bear it. The idea of sitting there, watching everyone cry while I learn the truth of what happened, turns my stomach. And I know Patricia will be watching me constantly, enjoying her victory. But what hurts me the most is knowing that Henry believed her lies. It doesn't matter how hard I try to convince myself that he was sick, vulnerable and manipulated. In his last days, when he should have known who to trust, he doubted me. He really believed that I was capable of stealing from him. And I'm not sure I can ever forgive him. I constantly imagine different scenarios that could unfold. If I attend, I know that Patricia will take every opportunity to make me feel bad. She will play her part as the grieving widow, pretending to be devastated, when in reality she is satisfied that she has achieved her goal. Her plan worked perfectly, and Ryan will remain by her side, counting the minutes until he can access the inheritance that awaits him. If I don't attend, people will start talking. They'll gossip about how I wasn't even able to show up to say goodbye. Patricia will use that to her advantage, turning it into further proof that Henry was right to change the will. I feel like no matter what I do, I'll lose. But maybe that's exactly what Patricia wants. The most painful thing is that I'm not interested in the will itself. I only cared about my relationship with Henry. Although I hate that the people least deserving of the money are probably the ones who will get it. Honestly, I don't know if I will have the strength to get through the funeral without breaking down. I don't know if I will be able to see my husband crying for his father while I feel nothing but anger and sadness at the way it all ended. But one thing I am sure of, this is far from over. Update 1. After debating internally about whether or not to attend the wake, I finally sat down with my husband, Mark, and we had a heart-to-heart about it. I told him how much I feared showing up, how terrified I was of the idea of being there while Patricia gloated over her triumph. I shared with him my anger and pain because Henry died believing that I was a thief, and how I doubted that I would be able to process the grief as I should. To his credit, Mark did not dismiss my feelings. He is also processing his loss, but he acknowledged that part of him feels complicit in this situation because of the way his mother manipulated the circumstances. He mentioned that Henry did not only represent my loss, but also his, and that it affected him deeply to know that his father's last days were contaminated by Patricia's lies. We talked for a long time, addressing all the aspects, and finally reached a decision. We will not attend the wake. Neither of us finds any sense in submitting to Patricia's fake tears and Ryan's presumptuous attitude. We anticipated exactly how events would unfold. Patricia would make a scene, Ryan would act like the perfect grieving son, and the whole thing would be a performance designed to cast Mark and me as the villains. We refused to play along. However, we will attend the funeral. Not for Patricia, not for Ryan, but because Henry was someone we loved before he was manipulated. And like it or not, we must be present for the reading of the will that will take place afterwards. We know that Patricia made sure that Henry amended it in her and Ryan's favor, of course, but at this point, it is no longer even about the money. And as expected, Patricia is already doing everything she can to distort the story in her favor. She is now telling family members that Mark and I are not cooperating at all with the funeral arrangements. She is presenting herself as the grandmother that not even her own son helps. But the reality is that she has prevented us from cooperating from the beginning. Since Henry's death, every time Mark or I have tried to offer assistance, she has ignored us, pushed us away, or claimed that everything was already organized. But the situation is getting even worse. Patricia is now telling everyone that she convinced Henry not to press charges against me for theft. She is acting as if I should be grateful to her because, according to her, Henry wanted to take legal action, but she suggested to him that it wasn't worth it, that he should simply consider the money I supposedly took as an early inheritance. In her version of events, Henry was furious with me and wanted to punish me, but she, the ever-compassionate and merciful wife, persuaded him to let it go. I can't express how disgusting it is to hear this. Not only did I never steal a penny from Henry, but now Patricia acts as if she were the reason I wasn't arrested. But I know that trying to debate with her now will only give her more power. She thrives on distorting reality, and the more I oppose her, the more she will manipulate the story in her favor. So I won't. Instead, I'll smile at the funeral, I'll sit through the reading of the will, and when it's all over, Mark and I will cut Patricia and Ryan out of our lives completely. The people I really care about know the truth, and that's what matters. At this point, the inheritance isn't even the main point anymore. It would be satisfying to receive a share just to spite Patricia, no doubt. But at the end of the day, the real victory is in moving away for good. If all this chaotic situation culminates in Mark and I permanently excluding them from our lives, then that is the only thing that matters. She and Ryan belong in oblivion, where they have always deserved to be. And soon, that is exactly where they will be. Update 2. The last day of Henry's wake is approaching, just 2 days away, and I was completely determined to keep my distance from Patricia and Ryan. I didn't want to have any contact with them. However, it seems that avoiding the wake completely was not a viable option, not when Patricia has been working tirelessly to turn the rest of the family against me. Over the last few days, Mark and I have received numerous messages from family members demanding our attendance. They present it as a show of respect, but the implicit message is clear. It's all about appearances, about damage control. And predictably, Patricia has been extremely generous in sharing information about my alleged betrayal, while continuing to encourage everyone to forgive me. Her latest act is that of the long-suffering and self-sacrificing widow who values family above all else, despite what I supposedly did. I no longer care what they think of me. It doesn't affect me if they are convinced that I am a thief, if they believe that I deserve to be cut off from Henry's life in his final moments. They've already made up their minds, and fighting against that perception won't change anything. They're just manipulated followers. But Mark and I have made a decision. We're going to attend. Not because we care about Patricia or the opinion of her allies, but for ourselves. We'll only attend the last day of the wake. One more day to endure before we free ourselves completely. I hate the idea of entering that space and becoming the center of the spectacle orchestrated by Patricia. But you know what? Let them do it. While Patricia is obsessed with controlling the family, and Ryan continues to dream of his inheritance, Mark and I are making preparations to leave. Not just the city, but the country. For several months now, we have been planning to become digital nomads. Both Mark and I work in fields that allow us to perform our duties remotely, and after all these experiences, we have realized that we no longer wish to remain here. We have nothing of value left in this place, not even a real family. We want to start from scratch. We just need to endure a little more suffering before we achieve our freedom. I will not interact with Patricia. I will not participate in her game. I will stand by Mark with dignity, and I will get through the day without giving in to her provocations. After this will come the funeral and then the reading of the will. And after that, Patricia and Ryan can remain stuck in their toxicity while we move on with our lives. Far, far away from them. Update 3. I needed to retire and write this because I am so outraged right now that I can barely type due to the trembling of my hands. I anticipated that today would be difficult, but I never imagined that Patricia would take her performance to such a calculated level. Mark and I arrived at the wake as planned, and as soon as we entered the room, I knew immediately that the day would be terrible. Patricia was completely in her element, moving through the space like a devastated widow. But every time someone approached to express their condolences, she would bow her head slightly, bring a handkerchief to her eyes, completely dry, and remain receptive to the attention. And then she spotted us. She made quite a show of approaching, moving with studied slowness, with an expression of pain and understanding. And when she reached us, she spoke loudly enough to make sure those present could hear her. She said she knew we would attend because, in the end, the family always finds its way back in these difficult moments. I was on the verge of losing control at that very moment. The calculated way in which she expressed it, the forced sweetness of her tone, positioned me as the antagonist while she presented herself as the victim. I hated her deeply. She said it in such a syrupy way, so apparently generously, perfectly aware of what she was doing. And of course, there were relatives watching closely. I had to make an extraordinary effort not to react impulsively. I wanted to confront her, but we were in the middle of a wake, and doing so alone would only give her more ammunition to continue her narrative. Partly she was doing it to gain sympathy, and partly to provoke my reaction and get exactly what she needed, evidence that I was the problematic person, who raises their voice to a poor widow during her husband's funeral, or who argues with her in such circumstances. But Patricia had not finished her performance. Throughout our time there, she found subtle ways to hurl hurtful comments at us. She mentioned how unfortunate it had been that Henry had been so preoccupied in his last days, pausing strategically long for the insinuation to be explicit, before adding that at least now he was at peace. But the most unbearable thing happened when, talking to another assistant, he mentioned Henry's generosity, emphasizing how much he had given even to those who did not deserve it. When we finally managed to momentarily distance ourselves from the crowd, Mark looked at me and asked if we wanted to leave. I didn't hesitate for a second. We withdrew as discreetly as possible to avoid creating a scene. We left earlier than planned, but at least we had paid our respects to the deceased. However, this does not mean that the situation has not affected us. Keeping composure in such circumstances is not easy, but it is the right thing to do. Tomorrow is the funeral and the reading of the will. I need to recover my energy for that moment, which is why I am writing. Reading your comments is comforting. We have been reading all the responses, and I just wanted to express my gratitude. From the bottom of my heart. Update 4. After the reading of the will, Mark and I were granted our freedom. And we are now living abroad, adapting to our new lives. I have lost track of time, which is why I did not update for 2 months. I apologize for the delay. Between adapting to a new country, managing all the logistics of the move, and simply trying to catch my breath after everything that has happened, I have hardly had a chance to sit down and write. But now, with this new life unfolding before me, I think I can take the time to relate everything that has happened in detail. Oh, and as if that weren't enough, we're expecting a baby. It was a complete surprise. With all the recent circumstances, pregnancy was the last thing on our minds, but life had other plans. When we saw the positive result, our perspective changed radically. Suddenly, our priority was not simply to escape our toxic past, but to ensure that our future child was not born into that environment. Mark is absolutely happy, and so am I. Although he already talks incessantly about everything he wants to do as a father, about endless plans. I am aware that raising a child abroad will not be easy, but in our old home it would have been considerably worse. Of that I have no doubt. But before our life could improve, before this new beginning, we had to face one last battle, the reading of the will. That day, Patricia and Ryan entered the office as if they were celebrating an assured victory in advance. Neither could hide the satisfaction of being so close to accessing Henry's estate. Meanwhile, Mark and I remained silent, prepared for the final blow that we anticipated. We had already accepted that Henry had modified the will under Patricia's manipulative influence. We had already assumed that this would simply represent one last humiliation that we would have to endure before cutting off contact with them for good. But then the lawyer began to read Henry's final provisions. They were not what Patricia and Ryan expected, and certainly did not coincide with our expectations either. To begin with, Ryan, the favorite son, his mother's unconditional favorite, barely figured significantly in the will. Henry left him only a fraction of what he expected, considerably less than he had taken for granted, and I could see the panic spreading across his face as the lawyer continued to read. But that wasn't even the most shocking thing. Henry had set strict conditions for Ryan to access his inheritance. His share was completely withheld until he demonstrated financial independence, which meant holding down a steady job, earning a steady income, and providing evidence that he could support himself without Patricia's permanent assistance. I had never seen someone go so quickly from arrogance to absolute terror. Patricia completely lost her elegant composure, because if those were the conditions for Ryan, she was starting to panic about what might happen to her. And then came the final blow. Henry had left legal evidence, documents proving that Patricia's accusations against me were completely false. Apparently, he wasn't as convinced of her lies as she assumed. He had investigated on his own, and before he passed away, he made sure to leave conclusive evidence that completely exonerated me. The lawyer presented documentation that conclusively destroyed the alleged evidence fabricated by Patricia. That was the inheritance intended for her. And despite all his efforts to eliminate me from Henry's life, he still left me a significant part of his estate, as well as the largest share to my husband. Patricia and Ryan were completely taken aback by this unexpected turn of events. Patricia demanded to examine the documents, insisting that there must be some mistake. Ryan, unable to assimilate what had just happened, began to shout that this was unfair, that Henry had promised him more, that he had been deceived. The atmosphere descended into absolute chaos. It was absolutely liberating to witness. Mark and I remained seated, watching his whole world crumble. I hadn't anticipated it. I had already accepted the idea that Henry had been manipulated right to the end. But, ironically, the ones who had really been manipulated were his son and his wife. When we left the lawyer's office, I felt extraordinarily relieved, more liberated than I had felt in months. Not only because my reputation had been restored, but because this nightmare was over. Patricia and Ryan were left in a shameful position, publicly humiliated. A humiliation that is only just beginning, because the estate left by Henry will be used to take legal action against my mother-in-law for defamation. A lawsuit that will not exclusively affect Patricia, since the lawyer who read the will was also instructed by Henry to present this evidence to the courts. Because the missing money, the money that Patricia had accused me of stealing, had been appropriated by Patricia herself. Henry left precise instructions for this to be revealed during the reading of the will and for the formal complaint to be made later. Likewise, Ryan has a limited period of time to meet the conditions necessary to receive his share of the inheritance, 6 months. After that period has elapsed, the funds will be transferred to one of Henry's nieces. 2 months have already passed, and he is in a state of absolute despair. He has no idea what it means to work, so it is as if he has been asked to perform an impossible task. I still think about Henry occasionally. Despite his mistakes, despite the final events, I know he would have loved this baby deeply. It saddens me deeply to know that he will never meet his grandson. Update 5. We have decided to settle permanently in a country that we consider ideal for our newborn daughter, although our initial intention was always to adopt a digital nomad lifestyle. If there is anything capable of motivating us to settle in one place, it is definitely a daughter, so we do not regret this decision. We also believe that it is one of the best possible environments, as both education and healthcare are among the most advanced in the world, which are fundamental aspects for us at this stage. Neither of us has given up our professional activity, despite having received a generous inheritance from my father-in-law. These resources, in addition to financing the lawsuit against my mother-in-law, have been used to create various funds for our daughter and any other children we may have in the future. They will be used to guarantee her education, her eventual wedding, and even the purchase of a home. I'll start by talking about Ryan, as a kind of countdown began in the comments to monitor how much time my brother-in-law had left to find a job and thus access his share of the inheritance. Every day, someone counted the remaining days. And although he finally got a job, he did not meet all the conditions set out in the will to receive a share.